All right, everyone. It is time to get into some 3.3 analysis. We did have the 3.3 rules that dropped over the weekend, and it is a lot to cover. And I don't like. I like to try to be as brief as possible, but to be honest, there's just sort of a lot to cover, and I've really had to sort of trim down just a lot of content here. But before we get into it, hey, we'd really love to like, subscribe, and comment. I want to thank everyone who's helped me get above 500 subscribers. It means a lot to me, especially for just my growth as a channel. Really helps me also to possibly get some support from YouTube. So really appreciate it, everyone here. So I just want to be clear that I don't, like being negative. I think that any person who's generally followed the bulk of my content has seen that I've heaped a lot of praise on OPR. And I love the system, and I'm a big fan. But I sort of, with praise, that I've given to them, I also have to provide some critiques where I feel is necessary. And this is just one of those things with 3.3 that I feel I have to provide some critiques. So I am sort of calling this, just analyzing the 3.3 kerfuffle, just to be a little more diplomatic here. But this is the 3.3 update analysis here. So I always like to start off with the good. When these things come around, I always like to sort of preface this that I want to say, I appreciate all of the work that's been put into this update. I'm going to be talking mainly about the rules, but the UI updates, the army list changes, like there is a lot of work going on here. And I appreciate it, right? I think that is great. I just also want to say that while I think there are some problems with the 3.3 update from the rules, I do feel that Mr. Gaetano and the OPR, they're listening to the community. And I think that is great. I think this is a learning process for OPR and the community as well. Learning process for me. I think that OPR is growing. And I want to sort of put everything and wrap all this around as sort of a growing pain, right? Because I think there is this transition from, OPR being sort of this small one-man shop to really a professional company and really just growing up there and becoming and stepping to that new level. So in that time, there's going to be some growing pains. I want to say that although I think there's some problems with the rules, I feel that these rule updates, they're attempting to make the game better. So yeah, I think that. I don't think these updates are coming from maybe other companies which, are more cynical where they're just trying to sell more models. Like I don't see in these updates anywhere where they're clearly just trying to get a profit incentive. I really feel that these updates are trying to make the game better. And so just thank you for all that work. Thanks to the Alien Hive nerfs. I think that's great to see. Buffs to Custodian Brothers. I love that. I love that. I felt that since in OPR there really has been several armies that have sort of stayed in the top tier. And it's good to see, I think, a new army stepping in that top tier range, which is Custodian Brothers. Really great to see that. Yeah, I would love to see these changes happen to other armies, but, it's a good start. Custodian Brothers is great. Buffs to Battle Brothers and Sisters Destroyers. I think this is going to really help these two armies out, providing some more flexibility so that those Destroyers can bring those power weapons and power fists with that shield. Hey, great. So, again, let's just start off with a thank you here. All right, so let's sort of dive into this. There's a lot to cover here. I think the first thing we're going to have to talk about, I'll post the links in these descriptions on this latest call, and I have to address something, which is just a lot of people complaining comment that he was talking about alien hives. I just have to be candid. Coming from the owner of a company, this is inappropriate and unprofessional. He is running this company. He's being paid for this. The other thing is that he is providing feedback channels and encouraging feedback. And so to have feedback channels and to listen and then to get on calls and to sort of say, oh, people are complaining, it really, it makes the community look bad. And it makes OPR look bad because they are now complaining about the complaining. So, these sort of comments, they make us both look bad. The community look bad and OPR look bad. That they are sort of addressing their audience in this way. It just really also encouraged. I've seen some people in the community, Facebook, the different channels post some, some strongly worded comments, perhaps angry comments. And, it's difficult for people like myself who want to encourage a good conversation when the leader of the OPR is sort of being inappropriate himself. I would just encourage to someone, I would say, just as a critique, really needs to just, on these calls, needs to review his script and to just go over this. I don't know what's going on over there, but I do think some more scrutiny needs to happen on some of the scripts of these calls. I hate to say it, it shows a lack of responsibility from the leader of the company when they are sort of turning it on the community as complaining instead of saying, hey, this is, I'm responsible for the balance of these armies, and I'm going to take that responsibility onto myself rather than saying, oh, it's just the community complaining. So, really would encourage, a lot of the problems I think with this 3.3 update is sort of, I'm going to get into it, just the communication. And I think that as this continues to grow, this sort of cannot continue. It's not going to be good, and it's an easy fix. So let's get into some problems with 3.3. So a lot of the issues with 3, I think, really come from some communication issues. This is a learning pain that I think is going on where, the 3.3 beta test rules, they were sort of like hidden somewhere in the Discord. I wanted to say I appreciate some of people on my Discord, some friends who actually sent some of these links to these rules after the fact. I love OPR, but I don't have the opportunity to sort of constantly follow the Discord, right? And, the nature of Discord where these rules are posted and then all of a sudden this skips it. I had to actually search for these test rules, find them, and then after that I couldn't sort of follow the conversation here. What I gathered up, in other words, so I found out about these test rules after the fact. It's a period of time. And then after that I found out somewhere he was releasing them for playtesting. And so it felt rushed. Playtest time frame felt rushed, and partly it's because there wasn't just, these rules weren't put in a very good place so that the community could see them. There wasn't a time frame given on the playtesting. And I have to say that I think the rules themselves, and we're going to get into them, they don't feel finished. I think that some additional playtesting could have really helped refine these rules and not cause some confusion in the community. I would really suggest, OPR does a great job of giving release schedules and previews of their models. I would really highly encourage the OPR to do the same thing with the rules updates. We need to have, a roadmap of rule suggestions that needs to be out in front of the community for several months. There needs to be a lot of feedback. Even if the rules, they felt, it's good to get this testing, because I do feel just sort of, I don't feel that, we're going to get into that the full ramifications of the rules really went into this. I would really encourage just moving the beta test rules to the advanced rule set for a couple of months. Even better, I would actually encourage the beta test rules to be made public for broader feedback. I don't think that OPR is going to lose any Patreon subscribers if the beta tests are public, right? I think getting the beta test rules in the future organized is going to really help and provide that sort of consensus and understanding, because I've heard it from other people, other creators, and I'll speak for myself. This is really just thrown a whack into my my content schedule. I'm a proud supporter of OPR and a proud content creator of OPR, but when these rules come out of nowhere, it sort of just throws everyone for a loop, right? I have people messaging me like, you need, what is your opinion on this? And I have to sort of stop whatever I'm doing and sort of rethink. So, again, I appreciate that my community has helped me out just getting some of this organized. So, yeah, I think some communication issues would really help this. Let's get into the specifics. So, the assault rule. Okay, so there's a lot to go into the assault rule, and I want to start by saying I appreciate that he is trying to fix hybrid units, but with that, I don't think these rules were thought out. One thing, it has provided a lot of rules bloat, and it's the sort of rules bloat that I think is the problematic rules bloat, which is rules bloat to sort of heavily preemptively nerf this rule. So it's sort of like they're giving us this extra ability, but all of a sudden, all these rules are coming in to say, to sort of heavily limit and heavily punish people using it. The -1 to shoot in melee, the half move, which we're going to get into, that you have to target the units you assault. Again, the other thing is that with the morale changes to the morale, we're going to get into that later, a unit can't shoot something, perhaps proc a morale check, and then charge them. No, all that morale check now happens once. So there's no chance to waver them before the charge. And the other thing is that from what I'm reading in the rules, if the shooting test is bad, especially with that -1 to shoot, the assaulting unit is sort of forced to charge them. And so it's actually punishing. Another punishing aspect to it is that the assaulting unit doesn't get a chance to shoot them and then decide. They have to decide to charge them, and if they shoot them and it goes bad, they're punished for that. How about this is another thing, is that what happens if an opponent removes casualties to bring them out of charge range? Are they forced to do it? And by the way, I have been sent screenshots of conversations going in a Discord about fixing things and adjusting things to solve certain problems. Here's the thing. I appreciate that, but I have to judge the rules as written. The average community person is not perhaps privy to some of the information that I get as a content creator. Who, in other words, we have to judge the rules as written. We can't sort of, it isn't fair for the community, for OPR to sort of expect the community to sort of dig around in their Discord and find all these arbitrary and all these offhand potential rules fixes. That what if they just add more rules bloat? So real problem. And I go back to, again, all the rules are basically focused on, we have so much rules bloat that's just focused on clarifying an action that, to be frank, is going to rarely happen. I mean, it is, the assault rule is so circumstantial, and we've sort of piled in all these additional rules bloat into the base rules that is really a corner case. And it's going to be confusing to new players to know when they could even use the assault rule. Another thing is just, I hate to say it, we have to start, how do we calculate the final move range? I have two particular calculations here. One, it's the base move times 2 if they're charging, half because it's an assault move, and then I could theoretically add a spell movement buff, or maybe there's also some ability movement buffs that give some pluses to charge. So that's one way you can calculate it. Or do you calculate it the other way, where you take the move plus the spell movement buff plus the ability movement buff, and you add those together, and then you multiply them times 2 for the charge range, and then you divide them for the assault range. So here we already see we're now getting into calculations, and this is not in the spirit of one-page rules to sort of, are we going to have to, and the new tweak's going to provide a formula for how we calculate. It's just, again, I have to sort of say that I feel that the way these rules are written are unclear. And I do feel that if these rules had gone through some more playtesting, some of these things could have been uncovered and addressed already. So, again, I would hope this sort of further strengthens the argument. I would have much rather been having this conversation as test rules, but there are the rules. And then the community is also worried because we've heard another comment from him saying that he's going to close out the rules for another year, right? So, yeah. So the assault rule, I also have to talk about the assault rule because I'm going to post the link in the description. But some of the assault rule suggested tactics, to be frank, don't make any sense. He did go into a spiel, and you can check out I'll post the clip in there, where he sort of says, hey, here's a tactic that you can use for the assaulting unit. And that is, you can basically spend one turn and rush towards the enemy, and then force that enemy to back up or do something, and worried if that enemy is going to get assaulted, which is shooting in melee. There's just some real problems with that. And I'm only saying this because I am not certain that he fully understands how the assault rule really is going to affect games. He's trying to solve the hybrid tax issue. In other words, giving hybrid units full utilization. But here's an example here. I want to talk through this first scenario that he's laid out. A hybrid unit on turn one, let's say, could rush forward towards an enemy, so they don't move or shoot. And then on turn two, suppose that enemy does just stand at point blank range. That hybrid unit can assault the enemy, shooting and melee at -1, and there's only one morale check, right? Because this happens at the end of the activation. So during these 2 turns, 18 inches are covered in movement. They have shot once and they've went in melee once. And the total number of enemy morale checks is 1. This is his scenario that he's gave here, in which he says, hey, you can rush forward and then sort of threaten this assault here. But let's go to the second scenario, which is what a hybrid unit can also do, is they could just advance on turn 1, shoot the enemy with no penalty, perhaps proc a morale check. And then on turn 2, they could charge the enemy and fight in melee at no penalty and possibly cause another morale check. Again, 18 inches have been covered in these 2 turns. They have shot once and they've done melee once. And the number of potential enemy morale checks is 2. The second scenario is how it works previously. What I'm trying to say here is that he's making a suggestion to effectively give hybrid units more activations of movement and shooting. And in his example, a hybrid unit has still shot the same number of times and done melee the same number of times. And in the original second scenario, it's actually better. So I just want to say, this is, in other words, he was presenting a selling point that it's going to make hybrid units give more utilization of their melee and shooting. But in his scenario, it doesn't change anything, right? They're still just shooting once and doing once, right? They're still just utilizing half of their abilities. They're just splitting it over, 2 turns. So, and I want to point this out. I know this may be nitpicky, but I want to say that, and I would watch this clip, I don't think he really fully grasps sort of the intricacies of the assault rule. And I think these sort of things I would, again, encourage more playtesting, right? I would have loved to have sort of given this similar analysis to some playtest rules here. All right, so let's go into the new morale rules. So, the new morale rules, he has pitched them as providing more flexibility, when it's actually just more punishing. And we're going to get into this. So what are the new Shaken rules? One thing, they do introduce more rules bloat to sort of preemptively nerf something. In both of these cases, I want to be clear, I don't mind complexity in OPR. I didn't mind it. But when the complexity comes, when he's basically offering you new rules, here's an assault and here's some changes to morale. And then all the rules bloat is about sort of almost punishing you for taking advantage of these 2 things, right? It's, I don't think, good sort of rules. I don't think it's good complexity. So again, they're heavily punished for even not unshaking a unit, right? -1 quality, but especially the -1 defense is a huge nerf. Another is half move. The half move, when combined with the assault rules, means more math, more equations. Now, I think a shaken unit can now assault 1/4 of their move. So now there's an additional formula calculation that has to go in here, right? Now, actually, the old system was actually a lot more tactical, because if a unit was shaken, it didn't have -1 defense. And you could actually sort of pick your time to unshake the unit. One thing in playing a lot of games, when a unit got shaken, I would oftentimes not unwaver it until the very last part of a turn, because I didn't want it to get shot and, shaken again. But in the new system, that sort of strategy is now heavily punished, because now there's -1 defenses, heavily punishes you for not immediately unshaking a unit. So now a failed morale test is actually more punishing. Players now have less flexibility about when they can unshake a unit. He even mentioned this as like, hey, a shaken unit is now a prime target to get targeted. Well, again, you're forcing it's already tough to have a unit not activated in a turn, but to now effectively put that player in a position where they have to stop everything else they're doing and unshake them is a pretty big deal. Again, it's just all this stuff is just preemptive nerfs to just heavily discourage people from taking advantage of these new rules. So I don't think that the morale system with the -1 defense especially was sort of fully thought out. Let's get into the other part of the morale system, which I think a real problem with this update is basically the stealth massive buff to undead. So this wasn't even mentioned on the call, and I think this was I'm not sure why it wasn't mentioned on the call. It should have been. Undead only lose wounds on 1 or 2 when they fail a morale check. Now shaken and assault rules, I don't think they're as significant as this is. This, to me, is the most significant change to 3.3, that undead lose wounds only at 1 or 2. This is a massive buff to undead. And it's I'm not sure, does the OPR not realize how massive of a change this is? I feel, one, why didn't they mention this? Like, it goes back to it. Are they really fully comprehending what this means and the real massive buff this has to undead units? We're talking about undead units are you almost have to kill them to a man now, because they get morale checks, and even if they fail the morale checks, they're only losing on 1 or 2. You could easily have a lot of undead units fail a morale and not lose a single figure. And it also indirectly further buffs them, and that now Shaken is much more punishing. Undead units are now further buffed, right? Because they'll never suffer that -1 to their defense when they're Shaken. Really thought that this should have been mentioned on the call. All right. So let's talk about, so I've covered a lot. Let's get into some of the Grimdark future winners. So there is going to be a lot of, there is going to be a lot of minuses here and there. I think that armies, models especially, that have rules that explode: Devout, Relentless, Shooty, Furious, Rending, etc. Even armies like Blessed Sisters and Orc Marauders. Big buff to these. These are winners, because no matter how many minuses these units are taking on their morale, especially some of these units have kind of that quality 5 and 6 units, they're always going to be able to bank on that exploding 6s. So this is a buff to models with these certain sort of exploding on 6s abilities. Obviously, quality 6 units it's a buff to them. They don't really care about assaulting or morale checks. Quality 6 is always quality 6. Def 6 units the same way. A pretty substantial buff to these units. It doesn't matter how many negatives to defense they're out there. They're always going to be there. Obviously, undead units, robot legions, infected colonies, specifically in Grimdark Future. I mean, I'm going to focus on Grimdark Future just for brevity's sake here. You could, of course, apply this to Age of Fantasy. Of course, these armies got massive buffs. You could easily put robot legions back in S tier, back where we were in January, where robot legions were just steamrolling people. I mean, I haven't tested it yet, but there's no doubt about it that robot legions are certainly got more powerful. Some of the good changes, I think Custodian Brothers, Battle Brothers, and Blessed Sisters Destroyers, these are definitely some winners. Blessed Sisters, I think, is the big winner out of this one, getting really buffs with their Devout and Furious, and then getting some really good options for Destroyers. So I think Blessed Sisters are definitely a real winner in this one. All right, let's look at some losers. So quality 3 and 4 units, I think generally are slightly worse. Many of these units are, again, very susceptible to all of these minuses to quality, whether it's assaulting or the Shaken rules. These units are paying a lot of points for their quality. So if the quality 6 units are effectively ignoring them, there's a slight nerf to quality 3 and quality 4 units. Not a big deal, but it's something. The same thing with Def 3 and 4. If Def 6 units are effectively a buff, then the Def 3, the people who are paying for these points for these Def 3 and 4, it's a slight nerf. A small one, but a slight one. The other thing is caster units. So casters used to again, one of the really powerful thing about casters previously was that you could, especially if you were in like a combat squad or a combat caster, could cast damage spells at a unit, potentially waver that unit, and then charge them and just murder them. So now we see that casters, they don't get that sort of interstitial morale test if they proc it with their damage spells here. So a slight nerf. I don't think it's a big nerf, but it's important. I'm trying to just some of these things are small things, but they have to be considered, right? And so caster units, and of course breath attack units. So any unit that has like a breath attack that, again, during their activation they can breath attack something, or there's some of these symbol of plague and luster, all these things where you can cause some damage and then charge in. Again, trying to intermediately procking that morale check. Yeah, so there's a slight nerf to these abilities here. Non-undead units, so by virtue of undead units being significantly buffed, any non-undead unit, by comparison, is going to be slightly nerfed, right? So another loser in this is alien hives. Although sorry to complain again, but they still may be S tier. You know, alien hives have they just had such a strong backlog of really great things here. So yeah, I'm going to continue to. I would like to think of it as provide feedback, but if you want to call it complain, that's fine with me. All right, but they did. I feel at least alien hives are sort of brought a little lower here, and they may be down to A tier. I would need to test that further. We'll see. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I'd love feedback on this. I want to say that these are initial thoughts. I don't have some sort of clear tier list about where I need to do play testing, and this is just some initial analysis. And so I can't give any sort of tier list or modified tier list right now. I need to do testing. But I'd love to like, subscribe, and comment. And if you're in Austin, join the Austin Alternative Gaming Freaks. Thank you so much.